So in our last lesson, we looked at leadership in both the House and the Senate, and now we're going to talk about the committee system. So most of the work in terms of the development of legislation is going to happen in these committees. So the workload of each chamber is divided into committees and subcommittees, and we're going to talk about the 4 different types of committees here in just a minute. Committee membership is determined by party leaders. However, every member of Congress is going to be assigned to at least one standing committee. House committees have more members, but senators tend to serve on more committees. And this just goes back to the size of each chamber. Committee leadership. So a committee chair is the leader of a congressional committee. Pretty basic, straightforward definition there. And the committee chair has the authority over the committee's agenda. So their power includes selecting subcommittee chairs. They can kill a bill or a piece of legislation by not scheduling a hearing for it in the committee. And they can also recommend members to sit on conference committees. Now, leadership, so this committee chair position is traditionally based on seniority. So whoever has served in that committee the longest is traditionally more likely to be the committee chair. Committee membership. So members of Congress are often going to seek assignments on committees based on one of 2 things. The first is their own interests or expertise. So maybe they have a background in the military, so they're interested in being on a committee for Veterans Affairs. Or maybe they have a background in finance, so they're interested in being on a committee for budget or appropriations. The other is a committee's ability to help their prospects for re-election. So, for example, maybe a state is really big on agriculture. That member of Congress might try to get on an agriculture committee because there's a chance that he is going to help pass legislation and get legislation heard that could benefit his state. Okay, so it can be for their own interest or expertise or a committee's ability to help prospects for re-election. So there are 4 types of committees, so make sure that you know the differences between these 4 types of committees. The first is a standing committee, and these are permanent. This is where most of the work of Congress gets done, is in these standing committees. So they are going to focus on bills related to a particular policy area. So for example, if it is a committee on agriculture, they are looking at policy on agriculture. Now, membership in standing committees can allow members to develop expertise around specific issues. These committees consider legislation and oversee bureaucratic agencies, and they can be further divided into subcommittees. So these are just smaller, more specialized committees that divide up the work and try to flesh out the details in legislation. The next type of committee is a joint committee, and these are also permanent committees. And this is where members of both the House and the Senate are part of the committee. Okay, so joint, you can think of joined, they're working together. They focus public attention on issues, gather information from Congress, and speed up the legislative process. Now, joint committees have a more limited authority, and a lot of times they're just handling more housekeeping type of task, or they're keeping tabs on a specific policy area. So they inform Congress, but they don't introduce legislation. So for example, there is a joint committee on the Library of Congress. So just taking care of those housekeeping things concerning the Library of Congress. The next type of committee is a conference committee. So it is a temporary joint committee. So it has members of both the House and the Senate. And what this type of committee does is resolve differences between House and Senate versions of a bill. So before a piece of legislation can go to the president to either be signed into law or vetoed, that same piece of legislation, that same bill must be passed by both the House and the Senate. So that's what conference committees do. They resolve any kind of differences between the 2 versions of a bill, so it's the same bill being passed in each chamber. The last type of committee is a select committee. And this is a temporary committee that is called upon to investigate an issue, maybe a crisis or a scandal. So they rarely work on legislation. They're going to focus on collecting data, examining potential policy options. So an example of a select committee would be the Watergate Select Committee. Okay, so this committee was formed just to investigate the Watergate scandal with President Nixon. You may also see select committees referred to as special committees. So you can look here at the list of congressional committees. You might have to zoom in on this a little bit, but you can see some of the standing committees in both the House and the Senate. And let's talk a little bit about some of the important ones in each chamber. So in the House, you have the Rules Committee, and this committee is responsible for putting bills on the calendar and specifying whether or not amendments can be added to bills, setting the amount of time for a debate. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Rules Committee in a later lesson. The Ways and Means Committee is responsible for reviewing all bills that would raise or lower revenue, so taxes. Remember that any kind of bill pertaining to revenue has to originate in the House of Representatives. And then the Judiciary Committee, and it is responsible for beginning the process for impeachment of federal officials. So remember, impeachment charges have to start in the House of Representatives. So those are some of the big committees in the House. In the Senate, there is the Armed Services, and they're going to oversee issues dealing with the military. The Foreign Relations Committee, and they're going to play a key role in establishing international policy, evaluating treaties. So remember that the Senate is going to ratify treaties that are passed. And then the Judiciary Committee, and they're going to be responsible for the initial step in confirmation of all federal judges. Okay, so some of the important standing committees in the Senate. So this is Representative Hal Rogers. So again, he represents our area, and you can just see some of the committees that he has been part of. So how members of Congress can be on different committees and serve in different ways. A couple more things to talk about. First is caucuses, and these are just informal groups formed by members of Congress who share a common purpose or goal. So in Congress, there is the Black Caucus, Women's Caucus, and then each party will also have a caucus. Okay, so those members of Congress who are just sharing that common purpose. And last, we have congressional staff, and they have a few different roles. They are going to assist representatives and senators in providing casework. Okay, so all of that information that representatives and senators might not get to look at. They provide members with information about policies, legislation, and constituent preferences. They are going to help draft bills. And as the number and complexity of issues grows, so does the size of congressional staff. So each member of Congress is going to have their own staff. And that's where we're going to stop with this lesson.